Bill, thank you very much for agreeing to meet with me and do this video interview. For our audience, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do for a living?
Well, I have always been from California right now, and for the last 20 years or so it's been Mill Valley, California in Marin. We have a little office on the bridge of Mount Tam there, looking out over the Pacific Ocean and the redwood forests. I find it very conducive to staying at home now and then. The company is run from there, and it's called American Consulting and Training. It's been in existence for about 33 years.
Excellent, thank you. And what do you do with your firm, and how many employees and such do you have with it?
Well, we only have 3 employees on the payroll at the time. It's been as many as 12. We do have a group of affiliates who use many of the materials we've developed. There are about 7 of those. And there are a couple, 200 or 300 internal trainers who use programs I've developed for their organizations. So I don't know if you want to count them as part of the staff, but I do in some cases have to manage them.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any particular focus for what services you render for your clients?
Yeah, from the beginning my concern has been management development.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you share with us when you were first exposed to HPT, Human Performance Technology? When and where was that? How long ago?
Well, while I was working at getting my MBA, I ran across the first publications of Rensis Lickert and the Institute of Social Research from the University of Michigan. I was really stunned by what I read there, because I had left my job where I was working in the executive group to come back to school full-time, and I found the organization I had been working for, which I was somewhat disappointed in, perfectly described in their research, and described for me a process of development deterioration that had taken place over 3 years, and its causes in such a way that I was just stunned that people seemed to know as much about organizations as the Institute was demonstrating in his writings. So then I had started doing a little bit of training on the side, very, very simple stuff, but it was supervisory training. Terrible stuff. I was embarrassed to do it, and so I have started recreating it on my own, and was getting something that at least the students didn't fall asleep and get up and walk out on. So they kept me around a little bit, and I went to them and asked if they'd ever heard of Rensis Lickert, and they said, well, that's funny you should mention that, because there was some guy here the other day, he's just moved to Berkeley and he's come out to retire, and he worked with Rensis Lickert and told us about it, and here's his name and address. His name was Pat Waters. Happens to be the father of Alice Waters, the famous chef, by the way. I called Pat and went to lunch with him, and the cerebral matter just splattered all over the wall, and it was so exciting. He'd been working with Rensis Lickert for 17 years, and he was eager to get started on the West Coast with the survey organizational development process that he had developed for the Institute. Rensis Lickert, by the way, didn't care anything about how people used the research. He was only interested in proving that the research could be done. Pat Waters thought, because he'd been in management before he went to work with him, that we really ought to try to do something with it that would help the organizations. And so he was developing the organizational intervention that used the survey. And I began training with him and spent 3 years in the field with him. Got very familiar with the research at the Institute, and then other research being done about human systems of performance. And it was that organizational setting and background that was my real introduction to the question. I still didn't really know anything about designing training. Okay, mm-hmm. I invented everything I did from scratch as far as I was concerned. And I didn't know anybody else was doing it in anything like a professional way. Until Bob Carlton tried to fire me from a contract I already had with one of the counties in California, and he'd just been made the head of training for the county department there. And he did a year's worth of evaluation, found that none of the management training was having any effect at all on the organization, and then it was about a $5 million expense with no return. And he came to me and explained that. And he said, we did find one program that I think I can trace almost $200,000 worth of value to, and it was he said, the thing you're doing with supervisors. I mean, he wouldn't even call it a training program. He said, that thing you're doing with supervisors. And he said, and you know, they're really huge advocates for that program. So I don't feel like I can terminate our contract with you immediately, but I do want you to know I will have you evaluated at the end of this year by one of the best in the country. His name is Don Toasty. And if you don't find a way to get more results from the training you're doing, we will terminate your contract at the end of the year. That got my attention.
What year was that?
Well, let's see. That would be about 73, I think. 73 or 74.
Okay.
Okay. And
so you were introduced to Bob Carlton and Don
And
Toasty.
then
Was
Bob
that your introduction to human performance technology?
yeah, right. And Bob said, tell me what you need to do to revise the program. And I had just been reading a little bit about interaction modeling, video modeling for supervisors, which is what this program was about. So I said, well, what I'd love to do is get into video interaction modeling. And Bob finally gave me some attention at that point. He says, oh, do you know about that? And I said, well, yeah, I've heard about it, and it sounds right to me. It might be effective. He says, yeah, okay, well, put together a budget for me and tell me what you have in mind, and we'll see. So I did, and I made an enormous quote, I thought, to ask for $30,000 to develop a set of videos, having no idea that it was costing thousands of dollars a minute to make these things. Okay? And Bob smiled and said yes and gave me the contract, and then I went out and got my video crew, and we started doing video interaction modeling for supervisors. I'll pause now. As you can see, one question will get lots of response.
I'll
pause.
Great.
You have another question you'd like to ask?
No. So not that Don and Bob wouldn't have been, but who would you attribute as your biggest influences in what you're doing now within the context of human performance technology? Is it people and books and articles or programs that you attended, or and you can include Bob and Don, of course.
Well, and I would have to. I've already mentioned the Institute of Social Research, and it continues to be the foundational assumptions I'm operating from. I do believe we know a lot about organizations. They're not as mysterious as they seem, and that what they call System 4 is consistently the best kind of organization we see. I've worked for 3 or 4 of those. I've been with them when they came from near nothing to become dominant in their industries, companies like Intel. And they are Systems 4, and it works, okay? Mm-hmm. And so that's always been the context. I'm trying to teach what are the behaviors of System 4 for managers. And that's where Don and Bob picked up with me when they realized I had a set of behaviors that I was focused on and was trying to teach. They got familiar with the literature and then brought to it a lot of the modularization and the careful sequencing of skill development, the tools of training technology, really, which I was somewhat intuitive about, but it became much more easier and efficient once I was taught by Don and Bob how to do the analysis. The other thing, though, that I would give ISPI credit for, because after I met Bob and Don and realized this was really a profession, I very much wanted to find out and meet more of them. And Bob and Don were happy to bring me into ISPI and take me to all the parties. And when I joined NSPI, it was a party, okay?
Yes.
And all the real stuff went on at the parties. That's where we learned and fought it out with each other and shared our experiences. And by the way, it made alliances and contracts and partnerships on various kinds of work and traded models and all that sort of thing. So, but the other thing that came out of NSPI, and I've always attributed it to ISPI, is that it's systematic approach and starting from outputs. Okay,
yeah.
The exchange of outputs with the receiving system or customers, and that's where you start, and you back up there systematically to find out what is it we need to get that output. And that became for me, after my partnership with Bob and Don broke up, that turned out to be the #1 learning coming out of that working relationship. We've continued to collaborate on a lot of stuff since then, but the partnership wasn't working very well. So I went on my own financially, and I've been preoccupied and am always teaching managers that we need to start together around what are your expected outputs, okay? And how well are you communicating those? And that turns out to be 80% of the problem in management. It all starts there. They don't have their outputs well articulated.
Could, just for our audience here, could you describe the systems for that you were just talking about a little bit earlier?
Well, the easiest way to describe it, they found their data falling into 4 different, people have been calling them cultures later and all that sort of thing. They just called them systems. And system 1 is a sort of vicious autocratic management. I mean, it literally is the guy who says, I didn't hire you to listen to you. I hired you to do what I tell you to do. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, I am not going to keep you here. Right? And it's it's an intimidating and usually overbearing kind of autocracy. It is a sure thing for a quick, brief success and an absolute disaster for the organization in the long run. Any departments you let them run, they will kill Institute's research in 30 months, okay? So that's system 1. System 2 is also autocratic, but it smiles while it's doing it. It's very devious, and it's actually more psychologically dangerous for people because it is highly manipulative, very dishonest, okay, and full of covert conflict, very, very emotionally stressful working environment. Even worse, actually, than the overt ones. My mentor, Pat Waters, actually told me, don't try to work with those, the 2s, but work with 1s, because very often they know they're failing and they're looking for help, and they make very good students. Okay? So you can work with 1s. You can't work with 2s very well. They can't stop manipulating you either when they're trying to work with. System 3 is the muddled thing that you get when we really aren't trying to do it together. However you want to manage, as long as you get some results, is okay with me. And so everybody's running their part of the organization their way, and it's terribly inefficient and uncoordinated. And again, often a lot of covert conflict. But it isn't, it doesn't feel autocratic until crisis time, and then we find out who shouts the loudest. There's all kinds of stuff going on there, and every theory you can imagine in management is somebody's favorite one, and in his department that's the language you speak. And when you move from that department to the next, you have to start over again. So it's not very efficient, and it's characteristic of most of the organizations in America. Very confused. And system 4 is, by contrast, a very consultative, decision-oriented group work process. Okay. One of its key differences is its dependence on small group decision-making in the management structure, with a highly disciplined system of meetings that link together so that the organization literally cycles its resource issues from bottom of the organization as high as sometimes 5 or 6 levels of management, and from dinky little stuff that doesn't require any things to $50 million decisions, and it can turn those decisions in about 10 days is long.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and the decisions are good, and they get implemented immediately. Okay. So those organizations have an unusual amount of flexibility and innovation capacity, and they usually wiggle into their industry and take it over in about 10 to 15 years. You'll find they come from the old guys and put them in the shade.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's a very again, it isn't the warm fuzzy thing that people were thinking it might be back in the 60s and 70s. It's highly disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very overt in its conflict, and it has rules of engagement which allow people to make their decisions openly and to disagree and commit. Okay, that is, continue disagreeing while they actually decide we will do this anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So that's it's a very, very unique and very. When I say unique, what I mean is the statistics have not changed anytime somebody does the study. We have about 20% of American organizations being absolutely destroyed in the next 30 months by their system 1s and 2s. And we have 20% who are about to take over their market in another 10, 15 years, even if they're very small, and they're system 4. In between is the large part of the curve, the other 60% of the organizations in America, and they're in system 3, the muddle.
Mm-hmm. I've seen you present before at ISPI sessions, and so I've seen some of the mechanics of what you teach for systems 4 kinds of organizational behavior.
We can get very specific about it.
Are there references that the audience might want to follow up with to do some more reading on this, books and articles that you would suggest, things that you've written and perhaps others?
The Bibles here are really new patterns in management and the human organization. These are the 2 books from Rensis Lickert that were published in the late 60s, okay, as they were finishing their first 15, almost 20 years of research, okay. Mm-hmm. And then they went on from there developing some more. I would also say you would find similar things, easier to read actually, in Search for Excellence. You'll find it in Jim Collins' work. I'm very excited about the consistency with which Jim Collins rediscovers these patterns in his work, and is pretty specific about the behavior.
So in Good to Great. And,
yeah, Good to Great, and that one especially because it, it's talking about the turnarounds, okay, and the fact that that is possible, and it is the hardest thing to do. It's much easier to start right than it is to get right. And his first book, by the way, on Built to Last, was criticized, which he explains when he wrote the second book, was criticized because the Big 4 consultants said, yeah, well, starting right is a lot easier than trying to get an organization like that's in the muddle straightened out, okay? Mm-hmm. And so he said, okay, I'll go figure that out, okay? And when he did, he came back with exactly, as far as I'm concerned, everything he says is very much aligned with what the Institute was talking about. And that is, what happens is they go from muddled to System 4. And suddenly, these organizations that were nobody become quietly dominant. And the quiet leadership he talks about is characteristic. The leaders in System 4 are rarely show executives, okay? Mm-hmm. Very humble people sometimes. It's almost hard to find them from the wallpaper design when you meet them.
Thank you. Do you use the term when you're talking with your clients or your students, perhaps not with your students, but maybe with your clients, the phrase human performance technology, HPT?
I use it with the other professionals in the organization and encourage them to learn the language and to think about our problems that way. I rarely talk to executives in those terms. Okay. When you get to the executive, you need to talk about what are the outputs that you're trying to achieve, how much do you know you're losing and wasting?
Mm-hmm.
Where are the strengths in your organization? Usually we can go to the organizations that are succeeding and find at least the vestigial or the early forms of System 4 and say, let's build on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we go that way.
When you talk to others about human performance technology, how do you describe it or define it? Do you have a 30-second elevator speech or some such thing?
Yes. I say it's a systematic approach, and it begins with this concern. Do you know what output you're trying to produce?
Okay.
Okay. And we're going to back up from there. Okay. How do you know whether or not you're producing it? Okay. And if you're not producing it, what resources would you have to do it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of that simple, really, when
Mm-hmm.
it comes time to say, what are we going to go talk to people about? Well, let's go talk about this.
Okay. Okay. Where are you on your own professional learning curve? What things are you investigating as lifelong learners in this world of human performance technology? Where are you focused?
Well, let me say very quickly, I'm getting very old, and I've heard other people say this about getting old. I'm really having a confidence problem as I get older. I'm more and more certain of how much I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it scares me so much, I get a little too excited about what I do know because it's so precious.
Okay.
But in fact, where I am in my own development is to realize, gee, I wish I lived twice as long and could live twice as fast. Okay, I wish the information revolution had come even faster so that I might have gotten to more of my questions. But I am full of questions, and given the period we're in right now, we're doing this tape in 2011, and we have a culture, a whole society that seems to have come to a stall, and those issues concern me a great deal. I don't mind mentioning that the most influential book in the last 2 years is the one entitled Violence and Social Orders, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole aspect of what the historical sociologists have been doing that I wish I had known about earlier, because it's very, very useful. I see all of the same issues that they talk about on the large scale of societies and their rise and fall, that I would have to have a different career to do anything about, but it gives context and to some extent gives me a sense of mission about it really is important that we get our organizations out of the muddle, okay? We've got to get a lot more organizations performing their functions so that our society is productive and productive of the right stuff, okay? And this, we have a big change ahead of us here. Okay?
We're opportunity rich.
Lots of opportunities, that's right. It would be a nice time to start the career over and go into politics.
I'm not sure about that, but back to HPT in particular, are there terms within the world of HPT that you feel need to be clarified, to be defined a little bit sharper or differently than you hear them being used in your world?
Well, a little earlier you heard me talk about it as outputs, feedback, and resources.
Okay.
I think we could simplify a lot of our presentation of what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the academic precision with which it's being talked about, and it's being, set into a great variety of stages, and you should do this before you do that, and so on. And basically, all of that is true. The fact of the matter is, we still are not proving this or explaining it to executives well enough for organizations to get the political support they need to do it right. Okay.
Okay.
They don't. I can't think of an executive who's ever asked me to evaluate the training
Right.
that I do, all right?
Mm-hmm.
I do it for myself.
Okay.
I do it for my own learning, and the people that work with me learn with me while we're doing it. But my clients never ask for it. They're sure that if it works, they'll know it, and if it doesn't work, they'll know it. I know they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a lot of stuff that didn't work, and if I hadn't found out about it, I'd still be doing it, and they'd still be buying it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And they are still buying a lot of junk.
So do you think that's because some have overcomplicated this? Is that?
Yeah, sometimes I think we talk to each other too much and not enough to our clients.
Okay. So we get all trapped in the nuances and minutia of our technology versus making it simple.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Part of what I would like to accomplish with this HPT Legacy series that we're doing here today is to reflect back on the early days of the Society NSPI before the days of ISPI and some of the members and practitioners and thought leaders back at that time. And I was wondering if you might have a few stories to share with us about some things that happened to you or things that you were involved with other people, and does not have to be a professional story about a work project, although it could be, or just something to personalize some of these people, some of the people that you would like the rest of the current day members to remember fondly. So you have some good stories on people.
One or two come to mind, okay? I never spent very much time with Bob Mager, but I appreciated his books very much. And he was a strong influence after I got familiar with ISPI.
Mm-hmm.
But here's our story, okay? We were also part of AS2D at the time.
Uh-huh.
I went to AS2D before I met Bob and Don, and we were on the program committee for AS2D for its West Coast Conference, which was a really pretty good conference. My wife and I, Lila and I. And so I asked Lila to call Bob Mager and ask him if we could get him on the program. And she came back and she was blushing and kind of upset. And I said, well, what did he say? And she said, well, he spent most of the time explaining to me that AS2D is not a professional association, and no, he would not come.
It wasn't professional. This was back when it was this the American Society for Training Directors back then, or had they already made the change?
They were a little beyond that,
okay.
But not much, okay. And there was a lot of funny stuff going on there, but our Western regional conferences, I thought, had some pretty substantial people in it. And,
mm-hmm. What was his complaint exactly?
No, it's just, he said they don't know what they're talking about most of the time, and it's all fluff. And I've never forgot, as you can see, that interaction, and it caused me to evaluate what was going on for us at AS2D and at ISPI and
mm-hmm.
any other, like the OD network and that sort of thing. I'm members of all those things, but
mm-hmm.
I don't attend regularly anything but ISPI now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Bob Mager, I think, kind of got some of that started for me. Oh. Bob and Don did too. They were very critical of a lot of the stuff that was going on in management training. I feel like I sort of introduced the two of them to that field, mm-hmm. and they were appalled at what they saw going on, all right? We had a lot of confrontation, Bob and Don and I, because I still thought some of those things were okay. Bob and Don won the arguments most of the time. When you really looked at it, there was nothing to show for training that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I got beat up a lot.
By good people. It's all part of the learning path. Other folks?
A lot of the learning took place at parties for me at
right.
ISPI. There were all kinds of receptions going on, and they were pretty much open, and you could come.
Mm-hmm.
a lot went on there, and a lot of it was professional.
I recall, for example, the chapter that's now the Michigan chapter, the MSIT chapter, used to have a great reception every year, and it would be a great hangout. And you're right, there were a lot of times when that's where a lot of the learning would occur, or in the bar late at night, as you heard the old guard kind of debating and challenging each other, and more so than they would do during the sessions, although that would happen as well.
Yes, and of course they would backbite people who weren't drinking with them afterwards too, and gang up and straighten up their arguments so that they could engage again later the next day. But yeah, I remember, and not quite along this line, but there was another time at one of those parties where I went up to Bill Detterline. This is one of my first ISPI sessions, and Bill Detterline was working with Peter Lynn, who has been a partner of mine for the last 10 years, by the way. But at the time, he was working with Peter Lynn, and Peter Lynn was running their American analysis. They were doing something like $10 million a year of business with the federal government in military training. Mm-hmm. And I was so impressed. They were doing graphics for Bob and Don and I. We were contracting it out, and what a story that was, because Bob took all of his, come on, let's get the graphics right, into that relationship, and it was pretty stormy, but we got some pretty good stuff. Mm-hmm. But so I went to Bill Detterline, and I said, how do you get to have this much business? Gee, I'd really like to have an organization of that size. And he sort of tipped his head and he said, well, he says, you know, it really doesn't take very much. You just have to kind of notice what people are supposed to do, and then figure out what keeps them from doing it, and why would they do it. Mm-hmm. He says, you know, a little bit of that counts, but he says, most of the time, all it is, you just got to get people to be clear about what it is you want them to do, what kind of output you want them to produce. I said, I don't really think it's more complicated than that.
So back to the theme of it's all about the outputs.
Yeah,
and,
no, like I said, that's the big lesson for me from my long-term association with ISPI. Stick to the outputs.
Mm-hmm. Who else was influential back then? Well,
I could, start doing books, and I've already mentioned some of the ones I read and like. But it's always been a pleasure to read one and then go meet the author. Okay. Mm-hmm. By the way, I've learned that if you ever read a book that you're impressed with and you want to make sure you've got it right, there's almost no author in the world you can't call and they'll pick up the phone and talk to you. We don't get very many calls. So I've had interactions with people whose work I really admire, very casual, actually, just a phone conversation or two, but they've quickly been able to make sure or affirm that I understood what in fact they were trying to say. And that's I really have two recommendations generally for anybody in our profession. That is, join ISPI and try to find out where the dinner parties are and go join them. Okay. And the other one is call the authors you respect. Okay, that gets your attention, and don't be surprised when you find out they're very available.
So you seem to have found a tremendous amount of value in your relationship and participation in SPI and then ISPI. How do you feel about the society today, and where you think it should go, or where you see it going? Do you have any concerns with that, or given all the changes with the internet and the time crunch that people are experiencing at work and at home, and how do we make time for our professional development? And
well, we've sort of said this a couple of different ways, but basically, this is an enormous time of opportunity for human performance technology. Okay, we have millions of people who are unemployable because they need a new repertoire of skills, and they're adults. and they're older adults in many cases, 65 and older, and they need work, and they're very capable of learning. But we don't have very effective ways of getting the learning to them. One thing I would say is the profession itself is at the heart of the solution to the problem we are facing. Right?
Okay.
And it isn't just here, it's everywhere in the world, the same thing. We have public educational systems that simply are not getting it done. And industry is slowly taking over the whole task. They're asking that we at least teach them to read and add, subtract, and multiply, maybe divide, okay, but not much more than that. And then the corporations are going to pick them up and take them on, all right, because even in the universities, what they're teaching is very often, by the time you get your credential, everything they've taught you will be outdated, so you have to stay on the learning curve all the time. That's such an opportunity for us. We have such good work to do, and it will be very, very significant. I think ISPI needs to be careful about being too academic and being captured by our current academic institutions, which seem to be a bit trapped in their credential chase. We might even need to watch our own certification chase, okay, and be sure that we aren't building the expectation that because you have some kind of credential or certification, you have a competency that is going to be anything more than good for 3 years. That with information technology, this business we're in is just full of new opportunities and very steep learning curves for us who are practitioners of human performance technology. I can't keep up with it. It's really, really exploding very, very fast.
How are you using some of the newer technologies in your work?
When I'm working with managers, I'm a little surprised. A very large part of my work has been done in the high-tech industry. Because of my work at Intel, I've been referred all over the industry, and it's been a wonderful career. I'm surprised when I get inside the organizations to find out that managers still don't know how to use the information technology. That is pretty old, and let me be very specific. We don't have time to read each other, and we read faster than we talk, okay? There's nothing like the speed of light that goes on in imagery. All of our communications for the purposes of controlling the use of the organization's resources, management's task, is better done with imagery, okay? Charts and graphs and dashboards and, the skills of putting data together in those kinds of formats. Managers need to learn to do that for themselves, not to have it done for them by their IT department, okay? And I am shocked at that specific learning opportunity for managers. They really don't know how to efficiently put their issues in front of each other. And we have the technology for that. So in the work we've been doing lately, which was your question, in the work we've been doing lately, we've been preparing a lot of job aids in Excel spreadsheets, okay? And making it easier and easier for our managers to go immediately to the kinds of issues and communication processes that speed up the quality of decision making. So sometimes it isn't as the social networking thing, okay? And I would say, in fact, central to System 4 are meetings, and there's stuff that goes on face-to-face in meetings we really can't get to without seeing each other's faces. So I'm sure our conference calls with video are going to become increasingly important, and I would encourage people to look into it and to learn how to help make it work, because there are so many surprises there. People hate seeing themselves, by the way, and they're very shy about it once they see themselves. Our executives don't look like the professionals we're used to watching on television, and they are embarrassed. They come across looking like bumblers. They lose credibility being seen in video because they're being compared with our professional standards all
Right.
the time. This kind of stuff can be harmful, actually, in the interaction too. So be careful about the social networking and the assumption that we can do this one-on-one. You can't.
Mm-hmm.
System 4 does it with a pulse of meetings that are synchronized and making their decisions deliberately, faithfully, on schedule, all the time, all right?
So what you're saying is that face-to-face is a superior approach to this than doing things through virtual technology.
We really don't have a substitute for that, especially in the issue of developing trust and confidence, which is on the path to leadership. Until you've established that reputation, you're not going to be a leader. That is, you're never going to get voluntary fellowship in the organization. And it's very difficult to get people to trust you unless they have a chance to watch the small musculature in your face.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they learn and make their assessment, whether or not, I mean, you might be psychopathic and be able to fool us, but most people can't. And we're genetically designed to read it. So
mm-hmm.
there's all this stuff we know now.
Yeah.
Okay, and we need to be aware of it and make it work. Of course, I think managers are the most important people to train right now. Nobody else is going to get anything done if they don't get their act together.
or it's just futile if the managers are not competent.
That's right. So,
well, Bill, thank you for agreeing to do this video interview with me. And do you have any final words of wisdom or guidance for young people just coming into this? What you have said, join ISPI,
yes, right.
Get involved. Is there anything in particular that you would point them at, any resource or person or book where they might get started if they were interested in perhaps management development and following your track?
Well, I'll refer to some things Jobs said in the speech he made at Stanford, graduation speech everybody's been seeing on television the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. I just want to testify to the fact this is a terrific career, okay? It happens that I'm one who actualizes myself in the process of doing this work. So for me, it's just been a party the whole time. I just feel lucky that people will pay me to do it, okay? And I would say to you, as Jobs would say to you, you know, it's not a job, okay? Check it out. If you really don't care about getting people to cooperate, you don't want to go into management development. Mm-hmm. You don't want to go into management either, by the way. Mm-hmm. All right, so find out who you are and be yourself. I have enjoyed being myself in this career, and I would strongly recommend it to anybody who's concerned for keeping the human competencies rising generally in our global economy.
Thank you.